Imagine a world where the red flag flies once more over the Kremlin in Moscow. The hammer and sickle, symbols of a past empire, are suddenly symbols of the present. What if the Soviet Union, a giant that once covered 1/6 of the Earth's land, came back? For 70 years the world was divided, East versus West, communism versus capitalism. The Soviet Union was a superpower, putting the first man in space and building a massive army. It promised a different future for workers everywhere, though the reality was often very different. The government controlled everything, farms, factories, and the news. People lined up for bread and whispered their true thoughts in secret. This system created heroes and villains, scientific wonders and terrible famines. When the Berlin Wall fell in 1989, it was like a crack in a giant dam. People in Eastern Europe and within the Soviet republics began to demand freedom. They wanted to choose their own leaders and speak their minds without fear. The image of people climbing the wall became a symbol of hope. The return of a Soviet-style power would mean rebuilding that wall with new laws and fears. So, let's explore this what if. What if, in our world of today, the old bear wakes up? What would it look like? How could it even happen? The world today is connected by the internet, global trade, and social media. People have tasted freedom and opportunity. Would they give it up? This is not just a history lesson. It is a thought experiment about power, identity, and the future. We will look at how such a massive change could happen. We will see how the world might react, and we will ask the most important question: what can this story from an alternate timeline teach us about our own world right now? To understand how the Soviet Union could return, we first need to remember why it disappeared. By the 1980s, the Soviet economy was in deep trouble. The government spent huge amounts on the military and the space race trying to compete with the United States, but its planned economy was inefficient, producing unwanted goods and insufficient food. The long war in Afghanistan was costly in both money and lives. People saw that life in the West was better, with more goods and freedom. Mikhail Gorbachev, the Soviet leader, introduced glasnost and perestroika. Glasnost allowed people to criticize the government. Perestroika attempted to reform the economy. The new openness led people in the Soviet republics to demand independence. In 1991, a failed coup by old-style communist leaders showed the system had lost its power. The Soviet republics declared independence, and the Soviet Union officially ended. The red Soviet flag was lowered from the Kremlin for the last time. The memory of that empire did not disappear. For some, it was a memory of oppression; for others, a memory of stability and pride. It is this second memory, the feeling of a lost greatness, that could become the seed for its return. How could a new Soviet Union rise from the ashes in 2025? It wouldn't happen overnight. Imagine a series of economic crises hitting several former Soviet states at once. People become unhappy and scared, feeling their governments are weak and corrupt. They start to look for a strong leader who promises order, stability, and national pride. A charismatic leader emerges in Russia, using nostalgia as a powerful tool. They speak of the glory days of the Soviet Union, focusing on achievements and might. This message becomes popular with older generations and young people who feel lost. The leader uses state-controlled media to spread this message of unity and strength. The next step is to bring other former Soviet republics back into the fold. This involves a mix of promises and pressure, offering economic incentives and security. For some countries, joining a new union might seem like a natural step. But not everyone would join willingly, leading to political influence and economic threats. The goal is to make staying independent seem more difficult than joining the new union. Through a mix of soft power, economic deals, and hidden threats, a new union could be declared. The map of Eastern Europe and Central Asia could begin to change, piece by piece. The announcement of a new Soviet or Eurasian Union would send shockwaves globally. NATO would react immediately, increasing its military presence in Eastern Europe. The United States would lead international condemnation, imposing heavy economic sanctions. This would create a tense standoff, a Cold War 2.0, with both sides accusing each other of aggression. The world would once again be divided into two camps. The United Nations would become a battlefield of words, but likely powerless to stop the new union's formation. For Europe, this would be a nightmare, dividing the continent again. European nations would have to spend more on defense and find new energy sources. This would create economic problems and political divisions within the European Union. The return of the bear would not just be a problem for its neighbors, it would be a crisis for the entire global political order. Not all former Soviet republics would welcome a return to Moscow's control. Ukraine would be at the center of this resistance, seeing the new union as an existential threat. The Ukrainian government and its people would likely fight fiercely. This could lead to a large-scale, devastating war on the edge of Europe. Other nations like Georgia and Moldova would also face immense pressure. These countries are not NATO members, lacking security guarantees. The new union might try to destabilize these countries from within. This resistance would create a massive humanitarian crisis with millions fleeing their homes. The refugee crisis would strain the resources of the European Union. The human cost of the new union's expansion would be immense, measured in lost lives and displaced families. Creating a new Soviet-style economy in 2025 would be incredibly difficult. The original Soviet Union had a command economy which doesn't work well today. A new union would have to decide, copy the old system or create something new? A return to a full command economy seems impossible. A more likely scenario is a hybrid system with government control of key industries. The new economic bloc would face huge challenges, isolated from the West by sanctions. It would need to become self-reliant, developing its own technology and financial systems. The biggest economic challenge would be innovation. Command economies are not good at creating new things. In a world driven by rapid technological change, an economy that cannot innovate will fall behind. The new union might build a powerful army but struggle to create the next big tech innovation. This technological gap would grow larger every year, making the union poorer and weaker. The social impact of a new Soviet Union would create a deep generational divide. For many older people, the return of the union might be comforting. They remember a time when the state provided stability and order. For young people, however, it would be a catastrophe. They have grown up in a connected world valuing freedom and expression. A new union would mean a digital iron curtain with state-controlled internet and censorship. This generational clash would lead to social tension. The government would promote patriotism and conformity, but young people would resist. They would use technology to access the outside world and organize. Society would be split between those who embrace the new order and those who fight it in the shadows. The return of a Soviet-style union would present a complex puzzle for China. On one hand, China and the new union would share a common enemy, the United States. This could lead to a powerful alliance, challenging American dominance. However, China would also be wary of a strong expansionist union on its border. A new union that seeks to control Central Asia would be a direct competitor to Chinese influence. Beijing would have to perform a delicate balancing act. Beyond the major powers, the reaction from the global south would be mixed. Some nations might see the new union as a counterweight to Western influence. Others would be alarmed by a superpower redrawing borders by force. The world would become more fragmented and unpredictable. The clear lines of the old Cold War would be replaced by a messy web of shifting alliances. So how likely is this scenario? A full-scale restoration of the USSR is highly unlikely. The world has changed too much and the hurdles are immense. However, a less formal Russian-led bloc is a more realistic possibility. This might not be called the Soviet Union, but could be a union built on authoritarianism and nationalism. This version of a returned union is not just a thought experiment, it is a plausible direction. What this teaches us is that history is not over. The stability after 1991 was not permanent. Democracy and freedom are not guaranteed, they must be defended. The powerful pull of nostalgia can be used by leaders for better or worse. Imagining the return of the Soviet Union forces us to look at the cracks in our modern world. It makes us think about the importance of international alliances and the dangers of unchecked nationalism. The red flag may never fly over the Kremlin again, but the ideas it represented are still with us. Understanding them is key to understanding the challenges we face today and the future we are trying to build.